Before we begin exploring research methods, it's important to understand a fundamental question. What is reality? This is where ontology comes in. Ontology is a branch of philosophy that examines the nature of reality, what exists, and how we understand what exists. In research, our ontological position shapes how we view the world and the phenomena we study. Do we believe reality is fixed and independent of us? Or do we see it as something shaped by human experience and perception? Different answers to these questions give rise to different ontological approaches, such as realism and constructivism, each guiding how research is designed and interpreted. In this section, we will explore these approaches and understand how they influence the way knowledge is developed. 1. Realist ontology is the philosophical view that a structured reality exists independently of human minds, perceptions, or beliefs, forming a core foundation for much of scientific thinking. It holds that objects, properties, and causal mechanisms exist whether or not they are observed, and that statements about the world can be true or false based on how things actually are. A key feature of realism is the distinction between ontology, what exists, and epistemology, what we can know, emphasizing that while reality is independent, our knowledge of it may be partial, theory-laden, and subject to revision. Different forms of realism refine this idea. Naive realism assumes direct access to reality through perception. Scientific realism affirms the existence of unobservable entities posited by successful theories, and critical realism argues that although reality exists independently, our understanding of it is mediated by social, theoretical, and methodological factors. Realism is often contrasted with idealism, which ties reality to consciousness, and constructivism, which emphasizes the role of social processes in shaping aspects of reality, especially in the social sciences. While strongly embedded in the natural sciences, realism also influences social sciences, often in combination with interpretive approaches. Despite challenges such as theory change and limits of knowledge, realist ontology remains a central framework because it supports the idea that scientific inquiry progressively uncovers features of a real. 2. Constructivist ontology is a philosophical position about the nature of reality. It argues that reality is not something fully independent and fixed, out there, but is instead constructed through human perception, social interaction, and interpretation. In simpler terms, what we consider real is shaped by how we think, communicate, and make meaning, rather than existing as a single objective truth that everyone experiences identically. Constructivism is the view that knowledge and meaning are actively constructed, not passively discovered. So, constructivist ontology says, reality is multiple, not singular. It is context-dependent, varies across cultures, histories, and individuals. It is co-created through language, beliefs, and social processes. Constructivist ontology assumes that people interpret the world through prior experiences and cultural frameworks. Language and social interaction shape what we consider real. Different groups may construct different but equally valid realities. For example, a mental illness might be seen as a biological disorder in one culture, but as a spiritual experience in another. The underlying phenomenon exists, but its meaning and reality differ depending on interpretation. Implications, especially in research. Researchers focus on understanding perspectives, not discovering one truth. Emphasis on qualitative methods, for example, interviews, narratives. Findings are seen as interpretations, not universal laws. Constructivist ontology doesn't deny that a world exists. It argues that our understanding of that world is always shaped by human meaning-making. resulting in multiple, context-dependent realities rather than a single objective one. 3. Objectivism. Objectivism assumes that social phenomena exist independently of human perception or interpretation, similar to realism but often applied specifically to social structures, for example, institutions, norms. Suggests that things like organizations or systems have a reality beyond individual beliefs. 4. Subjectivism. Subjectivism argues that reality is shaped entirely by individual consciousness and perception, stronger than constructivism in emphasizing the individual mind. Reality does not exist outside human interpretation. 5. Relativism. Relativism holds that reality is not fixed but varies across individuals, cultures, or contexts. There is no single universal truth, only multiple, equally valid realities. Common in cultural studies and anthropology, emphasizes diversity of perspectives, closely related to constructivism but more explicit about context dependence of truth. Relativism is a philosophical position that holds that truth, knowledge, and meaning are not absolute, but instead depend on context, such as cultural norms, historical conditions, language, or individual perspectives. Rather than assuming a single universal standard, it argues that what is considered true or valid can vary across different frameworks, and that judgments are always made within specific contexts. For example, cultural relativism suggests that values and practices should be understood within their own cultural settings, while epistemic relativism maintains that standards of knowledge depend on particular systems of thought, and moral relativism claims that ideas of right and wrong are not universally fixed. This perspective is especially influential in the humanities and social sciences because it helps explain the diversity of beliefs, meanings, and practices across societies. However, relativism is also debated, as critics argue that taken too far, it can make it difficult to evaluate conflicting claims or defend universal principles. 6. Critical realism. Critical realism is a middle ground approach stating that a real world exists independently of us like real is, but our understanding of it is always imperfect and influenced by social, cultural, and historical contexts. It distinguishes between what exists reality, what we observe, experience, what we understand, interpretation. This approach is widely used in social sciences because it balances objectivity with recognition of complexity. Critical realism combines a commitment to a mind-independent reality with the recognition that our knowledge of that reality is always partial, theory-laden, and shaped by social and historical contexts. It argues that the world exists independently of our perceptions, like real is, but we can only understand it through fallible interpretations and scientific inquiry. A key idea in critical realism is that reality operates on different levels: the empirical, what we observe or experience, the actual events that occur whether observed or not, and the real underlying structures and causal mechanisms that generate those events. This framework is especially useful in the social sciences because it allows researchers to acknowledge both objective structures, such as institutions, economic systems, or power relations, and the interpretive nature of human knowledge. By bridging realism and interpretivism, critical realism provides a balanced view that supports causal explanation, while remaining aware of the limits and context dependence of understanding.